Hello, everybody. How you guys doing today? I want to welcome everybody here today. I am Dr. Barrett Matthews, and welcome to Media Boss Live. Welcome to Media Boss Live. I want to welcome you guys here today. We have a great live show for you today. I want to live streams, I should say, rather today. I have a great guest today. I want to introduce you to. I want to first of all, if this is your first time here, I want to just tell you who the heck I am. I am Dr. Barrett Matthews of Media Boss Pro. I also am the host of the Media Boss podcast, and I do a lot of other events in media. I also my niche that I work in, I'm working with retired CEOs. So if you are a retired CEO, you know of a retired CEO, and they need to get their voice out there because people may be missing a great deal of knowledge, have them talk to me, because what I want to do is turn them into somewhat of an industry icon by using media, creating their own media to leverage that for them, maybe even in books, maybe in documentaries, maybe in podcasts. And speaking of podcasts, the gentleman I have with us today, oh my goodness, I'm just excited to have him here. I've known him for a few years now. You've probably seen him on my podcast. I've been on his. We've been to events together. We've shared stages together, and I'm just honored to know him. So, and I want you guys to make sure that you're letting everyone know that you're going to learn a lot about podcasting today, because this gentleman here is one of the, in my opinion, one of the foremost experts in the field, and that is my friend, Mr. Alex Sanfilippo. Alex, I want to welcome you here today for a Media Boss Live, my friend. Welcome, buddy.
Dr. Barrett, so excited to be here, man. Thankful for you. Thankful for the opportunity to share a stage with you any chance I get. You're one of my favorite people in podcasting, and have a lot of respect for you in media as well. I play like a small role. I play podcasting. You play like all things media, and I just have so much respect for you, man. So thank you for having me today.
First of all, you do not play a small role. you play a very major role in podcasting, and that's why I wanted to have you here today, because a lot of people, and I know you've probably heard everything when it comes to why people haven't started podcasts, the questions they have around podcasting, and so forth and so on. Because I know people will say so many things, but I wanted to bring you on today because, first of all, you not only help people to get guests for their podcast, you also help people who would want to be guests to get on podcasts, but you help people make money with podcasting as well. So, and you have, I call you a podcast innovator because some of the things that you have put into place, Alex, I know I'm pumping you up, but I mean it from the heart. But some of the things that you have put in place have helped so many people in the space of podcasting to make life a lot easier for them, to make it so they can breathe a little easier and just to get focused on sharing their message. So, first of all, I want to have you just talk a little bit about how you even got started in this arena.
Yeah, sure, man. And thank you for the kind words again. It means a lot. So everybody who's here today or watching replay later, thank you so much for being here. I'm a big Dr. Barrett Matthews fan myself, and I'm really am honored to be here. So again, Alex Sanfilippo, when I got my started in podcasting, I don't even remember the year. I think it was 2012 or something like that. And I immediately started a podcast and failed, or pod faded as we call it in the biz, like 6 weeks later. Fast forward a few years, I actually started a show that did really well. It was like a monthly show. It was where I was just sharing my faith. I happen to be a follower of Jesus, so I was just sharing that, and it did really well. And that kind of was with a blog that I was part of that ended up getting sold and moving to somebody else. And then I started my a podcast, another one. I was like, now I know all the things. I'm going to start this one really right and see where it goes. Long story short, that show led me to becoming full-time in the podcasting space as a software provider. Podmatch.com is my service, which connects podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. I always say it works like a dating app, but instead of connecting you for dates, it connects you for podcast interviews. And all that was just birthed out of my curiosity of being a podcaster. And still to this day, if you ask me like how I identify in this space, I'm a podcaster first and foremost. And I just happen to have the opportunity to serve other podcasters. And now even my show is about that. Podcasting Made Simple is my podcast, is literally about becoming a better podcast guest or a podcast host or something in between. And so I'm full-time podcasting. This is what I love to do. I'm here to serve and support this industry. And I really do my best to focus on the independent creators in the space. Again, on either side of the mic, I don't really get into working with or supporting like the top 1,500 shows. A lot of them are celebrity, a lot of them have big networks. That's just not really where I'm at. I'm an independent creator myself, and that's who I really like to spend my time with and in the community I like to serve. So, Dr. Barrett, hopefully that wasn't too long there, but that's everything about me. I don't think I have anything left.
Well, first of all, it cannot be too long because I mean, first of all, it's your truth, and I respect it, and I thank you definitely for it because what you're doing in becoming a software creator with podcasting is, like I said, you've made it easier for a lot of people. And now that since you've broached that subject, let's talk about some of the things you've created. Tell the audience, if you don't mind, what you've created and what inspired you to do so.
Yeah, so I referenced Podmatch, and Podmatch again is connecting guests and hosts for interviews. And the whole idea is not just to make the connection happen. Most podcasters at this point say, "Hey, I have no problem finding guests." That's the reality of it, right? I like to think of it more like how Amazon solved the problem of waiting for stuff and just removing the friction. That's really ultimately what we do. When we did all of our data on what Podmatch helps solve, it's about 3 hours of administration per podcast booking
Mm,
and about 14 emails. This is fresh data, so I'm still learning it. 14 emails back and forth on average. It removes that, so it's just taking the friction out of the process, similar to how if you have an Amazon Prime membership, you hit buy and then 2 days later it's at your front door, right? The idea is, can we just simplify that process from start to finish? And everything we do now is actually coming into the Podmatch name, Dr. Barrett. I think maybe I referenced this to you privately, but I'm just going to share it here as well.
sure.
We've got some other brands and stuff like that, but all of it is going into the Podmatch name.
Yes.
The idea,
Yeah.
again, simplification is our goal. So we want one login, one bill if you're a paying member of what we do, right? Not multiple websites and different offers for you. Hey, it's one thing and it's extremely transparent. It's all in one place. That really is our goal moving forward in podcasting. So we do some other things like help podcasters get reviews for their show.
Mm,
Also, we have like a production pipeline. So you can build out your like whole production checklist, if you will. And every time you add a new episode, you click add new episodes and it gives you all of the things you do. It assigns it team members, all that stuff. We call that workflows.
I
We've got
love
a
it.
handful of other, again, small things that are all becoming part of Podmatch. And I'm super excited about this. It's about 15 days from now, I think.
Mhm.
Don't quote me on that. We should have like the new homepage UX UI coming out for Podmatch where you'll see all these things just by going to the homepage so you can
Really?
know what it is. Yeah.
I'm
We're way
excited.
overdue, man. But anyway, that's kind of some of the stuff we're doing
You
right
said
now.
you're overdue, and it's like
Oh, for sure, man.
we're
Like,
trying to catch up with you, man. But
yeah.
but you say you're overdue. So, but here's what's cool. I don't know if you saw a post I put up last week, and I let people know that I got a chance to have dinner with the founder of Jackson Hewitt. He also was the founder of Liberty Tax as well. His name's John Hewitt. I interviewed him on my podcast. He came through Podmatch.
Oh, what? No way, really?
Really,
Wow,
I
that's
wanted to let
wild.
you know this live too, because
Yeah, that's cool. I had no idea.
yeah,
Wow.
he came through Podmatch, and he said he does about an interview a day. But
I'm sure. I
yeah,
imagine he's got some
yeah.
stuff to
So,
share.
but
That's for
it
sure.
was cool. So I got to, and he happens to live like 3 hours away from me, which happens to
No way.
also be within an hour of my alma mater. So I went down, visited my campus for the day, then went and had dinner with him and got to meet some
No
of his other
way.
people that he worked with and some of the people he's helped and mentored. So it was just a great day. It was a really great day, and it was all because of Podmatch. So I just
How
want to make sure
cool,
I let
man.
you know that and let the audience know as well that Podmatch is. See, Alex may not even know how big it is and how impactful it is because he's in it. So I want to let you guys know that this is I've met so many great people through Podmatch, and we haven't gotten into Podfest yet. But at Podfest, I remember Podfest. Just for those of you who don't know, it's a conference for podcasters and anyone in the podcasting space, so to speak. Alex plays a major role in that. And I remember not this year, but last year, I don't know if you remember this. We were in the vendor area, and you were saying, "Okay, I need to introduce you to this person." And everybody you said, I said, "Oh yeah, I had them on my podcast. I had them."
Oh yeah.
And you're like, "Well, you already know everybody."
I was psyched. I was like, man, Dr. Barrett, I'm going to introduce you all kinds of people. Like, I know them, know them, know them, know them. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. Well, Dr. Barrett knows everybody, which I know. But
No,
man,
I did
thank you for
not.
sharing that with me,
Stop
by the way, man.
that.
Thanks for sharing all that with me, man. That actually, I think with our topic today, I might even use that as an example.
Please.
So thank you for sharing that. That gives us a very fresh example to use today. So
Oh,
anyway,
please
back over to you,
do.
man. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, no problem. I said I wanted to do it live in front of. I didn't want to just call you and tell you. I wanted to make sure I let you know in front of everybody that that's because
Yeah, thank you.
of you. No, I appreciate it, man. I thank you because here and here's what I wanted to elaborate on that a little more. You can add this to it. He filled out the questionnaire for my podcast. But in my questionnaire, and some of you may want to take this tip, I asked for other referrals of people who fit my profile who could be on my podcast. Well, he listed 3 people that he thought I should interview. One of them, I reached out to all of them. One of them have responded, and we actually did an interview. And now, Friday, we have a follow up, a business call, because he wants to talk to me about doing business together. All of that because of Podmatch. So,
Dude, that's like I said, that's going to come up in a few minutes here when we get into our topic today. So I'm excited. I love a fresh example, man. I was going to use like a fictitious one. I got a real one now. So
yeah, you
anyway.
got a real one. You got a real one. Now, look, here's the funny part. Now all we got to do is get your wife to do a podcast, right?
That's a whole different topic, man. I'm not qualified. So
Well, and we joke about this, ladies and gentlemen, because his wife Alicia, I met her at Podfest, well, last year, but that's another joke in that as to how many times I met her. But but the thing is, she and I were just talking. I was trying to get her to do a podcast. She kept saying, "Nope, not gonna happen. Nope, no." So it's just a little joke between us. So in that, like you said, you were gonna do a fictitious story. I'm sure you have some other stories of people who have come together through Podmatch and got some great stories out of it, right?
for sure, man. Actually, most recently, somebody sent me a picture of them in. I know this person lives in Denver. They sent me a
Uh-huh.
picture of them with somebody else who I didn't know in London. And apparently, they flew over there to go hang out together because they met through Podmatch. I'm like, that's super
Whoa!
cool. Uh, yeah, wild. Then another one was recently. No one even sent this to me. I just happened to see it on social media randomly. I think somebody like put in the comments like, Alex, you might want to see this. And it was 2 people who met on Podmatch, liked the collaboration so much they had to do a podcast interview. They actually started a business together, and it was like already doing really well. They're like months into it. Like, hey, we met on this little website called Podmatch. And I was like, no way. Like, I don't know who they are. I never met them. There are so many stories like that. And so, yeah, and I always hope that it goes beyond what I know or am ever
Yeah,
able to see. I think that keeps me humble, right?
yeah.
Is to not be like totally involved with each little thing that happens, but I always appreciate being able to hear that. So there's so many fun things like that.
Oh, I'm sure. And for those of you who are like who are maybe thinking, well, can it really do what you say it'll do and all that stuff? I'm here to tell you, yes. And here's why I want to put it to you that way because like for instance, I have I had to slow down production on my podcast because through Podmatch, I've had so many people applying to be guests on my podcast. I usually do my podcast I do a weekly show and I do it in like 12 episode seasons. So right now, we're putting out season 5. So you got to figure we're probably in the middle of season 5 right now. So I still have about 6 or 7 more weeks to go to finish up this season. I have 6 and 7 already recorded, and most of those guests
Nice.
have come from Podmatch. So I've had to stop people from. I had to stop production. I'm actually literally about to start putting out 2 episodes a week because I just got to catch up because Podmatch has kept me so busy with people that want to be on my podcast, and that's a great feeling. And the other great thing is that, and like I said, I'm pumping this up because I love Podmatch and I love what Alex has done, and Alex is just a great dude. So the the request of me to be guest on podcasts. I've been interviewed by people all over the world through Podmatch.
Nice.
And
That's cool.
yeah, I mean, and some great podcasts, and so it's like and, AJ. I mean, I've been on his podcast, and it's just like a lot of people from all over the world have asked me to be on their podcast. People in South Africa, and it's so cool, and that's all because of my relationship with Podmatch. Now, one of the things that you have done, which I think is cool, is you've also figured out ways to, I guess, measure whether you have a successful podcast or not, correct?
Yeah, Pod Score. Yeah, that's what you're referencing. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, Pod Score, man. That's like if I have a quote unquote baby in podcasting, don't get me wrong, I love Podmatch. Like I'm on it every single day. I'm kind of obsessed. But if I have like something I created I consider like my baby in podcasting, it's for sure Podscore. And the whole idea from that came from early on with Podmatch. Actually, we had hosts leaving the platform almost every day. People were leaving,
Mm.
and so I told my co-founder Jesse, I'm like, dude, there's something wrong. Like it's not working for people. And I was like, but I don't know what it is, so I'm gonna start getting on calls with as many of them that will talk to me. I started booking like automatically. You cancel your account, you leave. It just sent you an email saying, "Hey, I'd love to have like a 5 minute. I think it was 10 minutes actually. 10 minute call with you." Yeah, it was 10 minutes. I remember I did 26 in one day one time. I don't
Oh.
recommend that. Way too many. It was ridiculous. I was so fried by the end of it. But the thing is,
How?
just back to back 10 minutes, just like next, 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 didn't move all day. Anyway, that was too many. But in general, I did that for about a year, which was too long, I'll admit now. It was actually ended up being about 1,600 people I talked to.
Whoa.
And there, of course, is the 1% that just straight up said, this website sucks, you're the worst, right? And that's fine. And there was another 1% that had some valid points that we're able to implement and improve. But the other 98%, I'd say, all said, oh, I'm not leaving Podmatch. I'm just quitting my podcast completely. I'm canceling everything.
Hmm.
And that's where I realized, okay, so we're really not the problem. There's 1% that just wouldn't take the time to figure out how to use it. There's 1% that had valid things, right? But the other 98%, the majority of them, just are leaving podcasting. And that's when I started going into researching pod fade, again, as we call it, just meaning you quit your podcast before it reaches the end of its run. And for some
Mhm.
people, the run is indefinite, right? Some of us were
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm going to do this for 5 years, I'll be done, right? But in general, these are people that quit really early. And the numbers were like alarming. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So I was
Yeah.
like, are we just getting all the bad podcasters going to quit? No, that's just all of them. That's just like how it goes in really any creator economy that you're in. People want the quick fix. They see the big
Yeah.
names in podcasts and they're like, okay, I'll probably be there in 2 weeks, right? And they don't get there in 2 weeks and they quit. So I wanted to build something that could really help podcasters get the right mindset around it and position themselves for success. So
Mhm.
PodScore is a personality quiz literally based on the actual personality types that podcasters have. So it'll tell you a real personality type if you take the quiz. But beyond that, it'll tell you based off what you're currently doing, your exact likelihood of success or failure, making it or not making it. Right. And then it'll give you, I guess, custom tailored is the way to say it. Custom
Yeah.
tailored steps for how you can actually make it yourself because you answered the questions in the quiz. So we're not like, do this. And you're like, I've been doing that forever. The system knows that. So it says, hey, you're already doing this, but what you're missing, it might be right here. Check this out. And so the whole idea is, can we just help people avoid pod fade? And our goal with this is to help 8,000 podcasters over a 3-year period of time be able to actually position themselves to make it in podcasting. And we've seen about, at this point, we've seen, I can't remember the exact number. It's just over 2,000. So I'd say we're a little bit behind on what we want to be, but you launch slow and you work your way up. So I'm really thrilled with PodScore. It's been a really cool thing. That's completely free, by the way, including the course. It was a course I used to charge $1,200 for, but I was like, if you take PodScore, it's free. So I'm like, just give it all away to really help and serve. And that's, again, my baby. That's what I think that's the contribution I really make to podcasting. If there's anything that will have like a legacy behind it, I would say it'd be PodScore.
And I love it. I think it's real cool because I mean the thing is a lot of podcasters are looking for what is my problem? Why am I not getting this? Why am I not getting these results? And I'm sure by that you have. I mean I know it's still relatively new compared to Podmatch, but do you have success stories on how those tips have to change have helped people to change and do better with their podcast?
Not exaggerating, a minimum of 10 a day, 7 days a week
Really?
at a minimum. Some days it can be 30, 40. People saying I did this, and like literally, even like this morning, I think I had like 35 this morning when I woke up of
Get
people saying
out!
like this. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, there's literally so many people go through it, and it's all organic. I don't even know. Like if I'm looking at it right now, um, I don't even know how to read this. I'm like trying to look at the dashboard. Forget it. Let me be present. Anyway, I'm trying to look at it, but like every day, people like say, "Hey, this literally changed everything for me." I had one person recently, and she was struggling to get her first like 5,000 downloads. That was her goal. She did have like a big practice and a big following. She just was like, nothing's converting. She went through just that section of it about that. And it's been under a year, and she just broke 10 million people have listened to her podcast now. She went from under 5,000 to 10 million in less than a year. And all she told me she did was tweak like, it was like 8 to 10 things. So it was a lot, right? She
Right,
just
but
made some
still, she
tweaks and
did it.
adjustments. Yeah, but she's like, I did this. And she goes, immediately, like overnight, my podcast listenership doubled. And she's like, I was just doing a few key things really wrong. And it's funny because she's like, I was getting ready to quit. I'm like, you have a podcast with 10 million people listening, like who have listened to it. Like, that's
Wow,
amazing, right?
that is
And so,
amazing.
and I don't say that because of it's not Alex Sanfilippo doing that. It's a host just realizing the areas they can improve in, and then them being the hero that implements it. Sure, I
Yeah,
might point it out to them, but ultimately, it's a host saying, "No, I'm willing to do the time." And I'm very thankful when somebody emails in saying it helped. Like that,
that's
again, this is
amazing.
my baby. So that's my favorite. So
I can see that is your favorite. I mean that's amazing. And that's I want to dig into that a little bit more. So What problems do most people have when you talk to them or when they log in about with their podcast? Is it money? Is it downloads? Is it content? What do you think the most problems that you run into are?
It's one of the main not the main reason I said yes to being here today is because it's Dr. Barrett Matthews, and no one says no to Dr. Barrett Matthews. But the
If you
second
only
reason
knew.
the second reason is because you said we're talking about getting more listeners and making money with your podcast. Those are by a long shot the top two.
The top
And,
two.
and then it drops down from there. I don't think they're necessarily the most important, but I know we won't. But here's the thing. If you start pursuing these two things right, you'll realize what's most important and you'll start to focus on them because you can kind of fix it through getting the proper perspective around downloads and money. So anyway, bringing it full circle, I know what we're talking about here today, but
Uh,
man, those are by far, and it's interesting. For a while it was all money, and then
yeah,
it
yeah.
started being money and downloads, and now it's shifted to being like more about downloads than money because I think people just are like, if I have more downloads I can make more
I
money.
can make more money, right?
So and we'll see. I mean, maybe that's the case. We'll see over the long run, but yeah, man. So I put together some ideas for today, so I'm excited to dive into this a bit. Whenever, obviously, following your lead whenever you're ready. So
Well, I want, yeah, I'm gonna, I definitely want to get into that like next, but I do want to, I want to, because what you just said there, because I want to just talk to some of the people out there real quick, because a lot of people think, oh, I want to start a podcast because I want to make money. Wrong, wrong, wrong. I just wanted to put that out there because I hear this all, as you know, I produce podcasts. I hear this from people all the time, and I think maybe you need to rethink that because I remember when I'm an author. My first book I wrote, I remember a guy was publishing it. He said, "Why'd you write this book?" And I said, "Because I have a message I think people need to learn from it." And he goes, "Good. As long as you didn't say you want to make a lot of money." Because most people don't make money with books. Most people don't make money with podcasts. Can you? Yes. Yes. But you have to know how to do it right. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Alex.
man, yeah, thanks. Real quick on that point as well. This is a good point. Good way to set this up.
Mhm.
Um, on the financial side of it, like you can make money with a podcast, yes, but if that's your primary objective, like go start a business that is focused on making money, right? It's like what you're going to do all this extra work to try to make money versus just making something that makes money. Like go build a product or service, right? So a podcast is a great funnel that leads into it. So, Dr. Barry, if you're cool, I'm going to go through 5 things real quick and we can discuss it and we'll go over to
Go.
the
Go,
listener
man.
side of things.
Go.
That's cool. Okay. Sweet. So the the first thing I always going straight off of pod score, people are always like, want more money, right? I want to make more money with it. And then their next thing is, so I'm trying to find the right sponsor or I'm trying to find someone who will do ads on my podcast. The first thing I want to share. So number one here is to avoid the mindset that ads and sponsors are the best way for you to make money with a podcast. It might be, but chances are it's probably not.
Right.
And a great example of that is, I'm going to come back to this one. I just want you all to get that mindset. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But so think about that, right? Like it might not be the best way. An alternative is number two that I'll mention here, which is to use, and yes, this is my own service. So take this with a grain of salt. But Podmatch has what's called the Pod Value Initiative, which means if you're a podcast host, we do a profit share. And so I actually just posted this on social media a couple days ago. So I'm looking at these numbers so I get them right here. But if you have 118 downloads every week, every 7 days, that puts you in the top 25% of all independent podcasts. So if you're an independent podcaster in the top 25 percentile, if you have 118 people listening, it takes work to get to that number, right? Every week. But if you're running ads at like a great CPM, so that's like CPM is kind of the standard for people are going to pay you. Let's say you get 100 CPM, which literally is basically unheard of. Celebrities probably don't get that high, right? So it's like unheard of. But let's just say you do, you're probably going to make about $51.13 per month. If you're using Podmatch, we just pulled these numbers as well. If you're using Podmatch, you are just to book your guests, just to use that on an average, you'll make $64.63 per month. So there's a little bit of a difference there, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, again, I'm not telling you not to run ads. I'm not here just to promote Podmatch, but I want you just to think differently. There might be something other than ads you can do. So number one is to think differently around ads. Maybe there's something else. Number two, consider using Podmatch to help offset those production costs. Number three, this is like, to me, the big one. I'm going to use Dr. Barrett as an example here. Thank you for sharing that earlier, is to
Hmm.
turn your guests into customers.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. If Dr. Barrett was getting 10,000 downloads a week, well, I don't even know what he's getting, but let's just say he's getting 10,000 downloads a week and he's making, I don't know what that would be, but let's imagine like a couple $1,000s a month off of running ads. It's pretty good, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But meeting the CEO of a bank and building a relationship and going to dinner with that guy, do you, like, anyone here checking this out, like, ask yourself, like, would that lead to more than a couple $1,000s a month? Like,
I
by
would
any
think
chance?
so.
Like, I think that's going to end up being pretty big for Dr. Barrett, right? Like, I think also even bigger for the guy at the bank who's like running it, right? Like, he can learn a lot from Dr. Barrett. Of course, it goes both ways, but like, he can really support this guy. And so here's the thing again, like, think about how can I turn my guest into a customer or even my listener into a customer. So again, avoiding the mindset of ads, using something like Podmatch to help offset production costs, and then focus on who's in your guest seat. And if you don't have guests, it's solo, think about just your listeners. But some ways to do this is to collect data and take action. So if you're like, Alex, I don't have a product or service, that's fine. What are they all struggling with? What is the
Yeah,
common trend that your listener brings up or your guest brings up? And they're always like, oh man, I wish someone would book me on shows. I'm so tired of having to do this, but it's so great to be here, right?
yeah,
You might be able to be like, well, I could get you on 10 more shows. Would you
yep,
pay for that? Right. Like, I'm using, that's kind of meta to use that, but there could be plenty
yeah,
other things that you can talk about. Right. So think about like, what data am I collecting from my listeners and my guests, and how can I take action on it to build something? The next one here is something I really love is like a group training or mastermind type of thing for listeners. Invite them in. Have your own ad, quote unquote, right, in your podcast saying, hey, I'm taking 12 people with me. I'm going to go deeper on the topic we go on this podcast for the next 12 weeks. Go to xyz.com, whatever your website is, right? And sign up for this mastermind or group training on this topic.
exactly.
These people already love your voice. Like, that's like, to me, like the perfect product. And you can charge a lot for this because it's hands-on, it's group training. And the last thing is to consider just making a digital product or course, maybe an ebook, maybe a course to help listeners again go further, something to help your people in your guest seat. These are all things that you can do to turn your guests and listeners into customers in a way that really serves and supports them. And moving right along, Barrett, am I good to keep on going? I got two more
Oh,
on this
yeah,
side.
yeah, it's fine.
Cool.
We can go to the top of the hour, so we're good.
Yeah. I mean, I got the listener side too, so I want to make sure I'm not like over speaking. So number four,
Talk as long as you want, man. This is why I got you here, buddy.
appreciate it, man. I always wanted, it's funny. My pastor says this, but it's not out of the Bible. It just sounds like it is. He says,
Uh-huh.
"Blessed are the short-winded, because they will be welcome back." So I
Well,
never want to be the guy who over speaks.
it's funny. A friend of mine who's a speaker, he says like this: "I don't want a standing ovation. I want a standing invitation."
Yeah, that's so good. All right, back to it because
Okay.
I want that too. Number four is to offer paid subscriptions. And I'll add this to offer paid subscriptions the right way. So a paid subscription, a lot of I use Buzzsprout as my hosting provider, and whatever you use is fine.
Mhm.
They offer paid subscriptions where basically I can release a podcast episode every week, but I can have a separate episode that's saying, "Hey, support me, and I'll give you access to this." Or that people can just, it can be listener support. If you're like, "Hey, if you're enjoying this, I'm trying to buy a new microphone. Consider supporting the show by subscribing to it through a paid subscription." Some people might give $2 or $3 a month, but hey, if you get a couple hundred people doing that, that's great.
Yeah.
And the thing is, a lot of people say, oh, well, that's just for premium content. I don't have premium content. I want to change that mindset. All of your content is premium.
Yep.
If you are sharing it as a gift for the world, it is you giving the best of what you know. It is a premium. And listen, someone should be very happy to be paying for that because you are really adding value and serving. So consider that with everything else. Have a paid subscription option as well for your inner circle, right? The listeners that really want to be there with you long term. And number five, this is a different one. This isn't necessarily like making money with your podcast, but saving money with your podcast.
Hmm.
Create an LLC for your podcast.
Mm.
Treat it like a business. Here's the thing, like this room I'm in right now, this is a room in my house. And I had some work done in this room, and I had them duplicate the room. Like we just did like a renovation, my wife and I. And
Right.
they did a few more things. I asked my CPA, he's like, oh yeah, you can write that off because they did this wall back here. So I wrote that off, right? Like, and it wasn't a lot of money, but that was $400. All
Yeah.
the light, the gear, the government says all that's a write-off because I am using this
That's
for
right.
this right here, right? And then also I write off, I don't know what the percentage is, but a percentage of my electrical, my utilities. I write off my internet. My phone is used for work. So like all that stuff is written off and totally legally done because I am operating my podcast as a business.
Yeah.
And so people are like, oh, I want to make money with my podcast. I'm like, maybe think about saving. And so I don't know exactly how much it saves me. My CPA would need to be here for that, but I know it saves me thousands of dollars per year because I'm treating it like a business. Yes,
Yeah.
it's still a hobby, it's still a passion, but I'm just from a government perspective telling them, hey, I'm taking this seriously. What do you all think? Right. And so
Yeah.
that type of thing can work really well. And those are kind of like five things I'd share. I mean, I've got tons more, but I think that these are some good ones that kind of get us thinking a little bit differently. And Dr. Barrett, I'd love to hear if you have anything to add before we move on to the listener side of things.
Well, it's I love the fact that you brought those things up because one, I tell people all the time, you need to get out of the traditional mindset of monetizing your podcast. Because the traditional mindset tells us that you need to get a certain number of downloads, which most people never achieve, to really start making the big money. And most people don't even know how to get a lot of downloads, let alone how to monetize it. So what you did there is something that I always tell. And another thing I tell people is that even just getting started, people who have businesses. Everybody does. Ask them if they want to sponsor your podcast. Do a read for them, run a commercial for them on your podcast. You'd be surprised at what people are willing to pay you just to have you talk about their business on your podcast, considering that if they go to a radio station, it's going to cost them a whole lot more than what you might charge them. So it's a great way to get money coming in and revenue coming in. You can run a package for a season, you can run a package for a year, whatever. And then you can have let people let it build up to where people vie to get on your podcast because they got to buy that ad space. And you can even do it while you interview them as well. Charge them a little bit more for that if you want to. So there's so many ways that you can monetize it. I just wanted to add that in there, Alex, and let you take it from there to the listener side because I love what you're doing here.
Yeah, man. Thanks. It's good reinforcement. And another very the idea, man, is be creative, right?
That's it.
Like be creative. And even if you are growing your listenership, which is what we're going to talk about now, still be creative, right? Like, don't be like, okay, well, if I could just grow listeners, I don't have to listen to Alex and Dr. Barrett, right? Like, you probably should because you're gonna do a lot better that way, right? But going over to the listener side, so again, I got 5 things here, so I'm gonna go through all 5 of these things. Number one, the single most important thing, I think a lot of people skip this one when they're training on this because we think it might be obvious, but make sure your content is good.
Mm.
Make sure your content is not good, really good. And here's why I say that. Like, if you've ever, anyone here, like, I know you're not like, if you're watching a replay, I can't hear you or see you, but like, have you ever watched The Office, the TV show The Office? That, like, I grew up with that. Maybe it's Seinfeld for some other people or Friends. Like, those are some others I think are the same category, right? There was never a time where any of the characters at the end said, "Hey, thanks for watching this episode of The Office. I'm Steve Carell. And if you like this, share it with your friends." That never happens, right? And the reason is because it's so good or so funny that you're gonna share it with people, right? Game of Thrones, one of the most popular TV shows of all time. Like, no one, they don't have to tell you to please help us spread the word. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but the reality
Right.
is, if it's so good, it's human nature to share what is good. We
Yeah.
like to share good things. And so if
Mm-hmm.
your podcast is so good, people are going to share it. I had an episode of my show that came out years ago, and I remember somebody listened to it and they emailed me saying, or they texted me, it was like a friend. He goes, "Dude, I've listened to this episode 5 times this week." He goes,
Wow.
and he was a coach. He's like, "I emailed all of my clients and told them if they don't listen to this week, they're fired." And he's like, "It's that good." And I didn't ask him to do that. I didn't say share it, right? The reality is it's just really good content. So here's the thing I'm trying to tell you here. Focus on making really good content because you can become the world's greatest marketer and bring millions of people to your show every single week. Like, just everyone listens to your show. But here's the thing, if they only listen for 5 minutes and leave, that's a grind not worth being part of. But
Yeah.
if your show is really good and you bring 10 people a week and they stay forever because it's so good and they tell 10 of their friends, that's better than being the marketer that can bring 1 million people a week, right?
Yeah.
Focus on making good content and on continuous improvement with yourself. Like, don't strive for perfection. Just make each episode better than the last. Just get a little
Mm-hmm.
bit better. And if
Mm.
you realize, you know what, it doesn't sound good, get a better mic. You know what, if the guests are just really heading in the wrong direction, find a different niche, right? Like, really focus on that. So, and I don't mean to go too deep into that, but really the first and most important thing is to focus on making good content because it will get shared if it's really good. The next thing, and this is like, I mentioned earlier that person that ended up getting up to 10 million
Yeah.
downloads
That's amazing.
within a year. This is the main thing they did. So my second point here is to use proper titles and descriptions. And even not just for your episodes, but maybe even for your show as well. I know a lot of people get attached to that, but here's an example. That person, I'll leave their real name out of it, but their show was called uh, Conversations Hosted by in their name. And first off, I never heard of them. They did have some following, but they weren't necessarily like famous. But also, their name was extremely hard to spell, first
Mm.
and last name. Like, both were like, I don't even know how to pronounce it. Like, I had to go to their LinkedIn and hit like click to hear how they pronounced it. Right? You know, you can do that on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Very thankful for that, by the way. But the thing is, so the show title was like something no one would ever look up, and the actual, it was, again, Conversations Hosted by, And then the actual episodes were episode number and then just the number. That was the title of the episode. And I just told her, I'm like, hey, if you update the name of your show to be more what it's about, and then the actual
Yeah.
description of the show and the description of the episodes and stuff, people are searching. So here's the thing: the main way that podcasts are discovered are through organic search. People are going to Google, they're going to Spotify, they're going to Amazon, they're going to Apple, they're typing in what they're looking for. And if you're not using any words about what it's actually about, people are not going to find it. A
Yeah.
great fictitious example is if I live in Jacksonville, Florida, very close to the ocean. If I have a surfing podcast and it's called Alex 2.0, and somebody's looking for a surfing podcast, they're never going to find my show because it doesn't describe what it's about. And so I always say this: the best title for your show and for your episodes is the title that you don't have to explain. If I have episode 13 coming out, I have to tell you a lot about that for you to get what it's about. But if I said how Dr. Barrett met a really famous bank owner and turned him into a client, how much explaining do I have to do about that? You just read exactly what that's about, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here's the thing: people might actually be searching for a transformation like that. So keep that in mind. Like, it's very low hanging fruit. That's the number one way podcasts are being found. So if you just take the extra effort, even consider using some AI if you're just not good at that stuff, but something is going to be better than nothing. So again, number 2 is use proper titles and descriptions.
Good.
Number 3 is to share your episode more than just once. And Dr. Barrett,
Mm.
I want to turn over to you for a minute because you get this. A lot of people, they're like, well, I really just like Facebook, so I'm just going to post my episode on Facebook the day it comes out. New episode out, done, and then done. And I'm like, wait, you just spent like weeks working on that. The release was anticipated, and then you mentioned it one time in one place. Dr. Barrett, I got to turn over to you real quick because I think that you can do a lot better
Yeah.
on this point than I can.
Well, I mean, it's just one of those things that, cause like you said at the beginning, I focus on various forms of media, so it would be a waste of me to spend all that time in a podcast and not share it in other forms as well. Because here's the one thing I like to express to people when it comes to any content they have. If I just put it on my podcast, let's say that it was on Spotify. If I just put it there and didn't share it in any other place, that's me assuming that everybody I serve only listens to Spotify. So, and that's not true, because some of you right now are saying, well, I don't listen to Spotify. So then wouldn't it make sense for me to put it somewhere where I know you will pay attention to it? Because if you're watching this live stream right now, this is obviously an area where you're comfortable. I figure it's better for me to put it to where my audience is comfortable and not just where I'm comfortable. Because I always call that ego-based marketing, where I'm just focused on what makes me comfortable, and that's not what serves you. But I always put my stuff out, like even just the short clips. I put it out just, if I do a podcast episode that aired today, you're going to see a clip of it today. You're going to see another clip tomorrow. You're going to see a quote the next day. Why? Because I want people to say, you know what, maybe I need to check this out. It may not get most of the people, but if I get just a couple of them to say, I need to check this out, then that's what I'm looking for. So yeah, that's what I see in that, Alex.
That's great, man. That's exactly like what I was hoping to get from you. And you're so good at that, Dr. Barrett. Like, I can remember we've done things over the years, and
Hmm.
sometimes I still see new posts come out about them. And you may have just like planted the seed, reminding people this exists, and then people are talking about it again. I'm like, man, that was like a year and a half ago. And here's the
Yeah.
thing: it's evergreen. I'm not like, man, I wish that wasn't getting spread anymore. It was Alex talking about a story, right? Like, no, I'm like, heck yeah, like it's still getting out there. I got more content to be able to share and stuff. So
In
again,
that vein, real quick, if you don't mind, I want to
yeah,
say that also when I'm talking to people about talking to your business owner friends to be on your podcast, remind them that their ad will stay on there forever. It's evergreen, which increases the value proposition for them to make them want to invest in your podcast. Also, guess what they're going to do? They're going to tell everyone else to listen to your podcast, which is increasing your listenership. So it's another thing that I always like to share with them.
yeah, no, that's a good point. I love that. Yeah, it got me thinking there. Anyway, sorry, back on point. Okay, number 4 on the points I have for today. This one is to be a guest on other podcasts.
Oh
So if
yeah,
you're a podcast host looking to grow your show, a great way to do that is to be on other shows. And I don't mean going on all of them. If you don't have a lot of capacity, like me, I'm a podcast host, go on 1 or 2 a month. Like, that's a great cadence. If you can do that every month, that's great. It's raising awareness for it. And here's the one universal truth about every podcast listener on earth: it's that they listen to podcasts. So it's a great way for you to be able to grow your podcast. Go where the podcast listeners already are, which is with other podcasts that mirror yours, right? And it doesn't need to be exactly the same thing, but find ways to be able to get on some other shows and stuff like that. And I think it's just a really great way to also build collaboration within the industry. So if you're not currently guesting, consider it. And again, I'm not telling you to go be on 100 shows as fast as possible. I actually prefer the mentality of, you know what, I can do 12 a year really well and just going after 12 a year. That is much better than burning yourself out and trying to get on as many as possible, because podcasting on either side of the mic really is the long game. And here's the thing, like I was on a show, I don't know how, I think it's been over 2 years now, Dr. Barrett.
Uh-huh.
And it just started blowing up. Like people are now like, wow, I heard you on this show. I'm like, that was 2 years ago. Like, but the thing is, the show just hit and people are going back and listening to previous episodes because they like it so much. You never know when that's going to
You
happen.
don't.
And so the best way to do it, once again, is just spread that out. Don't say 100 as fast as possible. Say 12 over the next year, 24 the next year. For me right now, I'm shooting for 50 this year. And I never do more than 1 week. That's all I'm doing. I don't know if you all know, but there's 52 weeks in a year. That's just good math right there. All right. Number 5, final one. And I call this one a super hack. This is to find one new listener every day. Find one new listener every day. And a lot of people don't agree that that's a super hack, because people are like, like, how do you do that? I'll explain how I do it, but real quick, let me tell you the mentality behind this. So I'm going to go to, I want this to be fresh. I need to go grab it real quick. So if I go to Buzzsprouts, I use Buzzsprout as a hosting provider and paying customer of them. And they have buzzsprout.com/stats. If you go there, it shows you based off of their podcasts, which they have a ton of podcasts, 124,000 that are active right now. And there's about 400,000 total active. So it tells you how big Buzzsprout is, right? And so at the bottom, they have the episode downloads in the first 7 days. And I mentioned that 400 or that, what did I say, 118 or something like that. Anyway, so I'm looking at how many downloads you need in the first 7 days to be in the top percentile of independent podcasters.
Yeah.
If you have 470 people listening in the first 7 days of every new episode release, so 470 people a week, that puts you in the top 10 percentile of all shows. Now, what I find a lot of people do is they want to create viral content so they can just get this spike to bump up there. They want their guests to share so much it bounces them up there. But the reality is that doesn't happen to most of us. It's never happened to me. Even with like super famous guests I've had on my podcast in previous time, it just doesn't seem to work that way. But what does work is me telling a person every single day about my show. And so I don't have a big show, but my show's been going for about 600 days. And I'm going to go log in real quick and see how many people listen to my show in the last 7 days. So my show's just like the podcast Made Simple is like just over 2 years old. So whatever that math is, I guess 700 or something like that. Anyway. And so if I go over here and see how many people have listened in the last 7 days, in the last 7 days, 715 people have listened. Most of those people I've invited one at a time. But guess what? I'm in the top 10 percentile of all shows, right? Like I'm at that level because I've been willing to say every day, I'm just going to find one person who needs my show. And so again, I encourage you, like, don't look at this as just like, I'll just create more content and eventually something's going to hit. I think you'll do that, create content. Like that's a great thing to do, but then invite people to it. And what I mean by that is join conversations. So for me, I'm really active on LinkedIn and Facebook are my two favorite. And I tend to be able to search them really well. So I find people saying, man, I wish I could figure out what mic I should be using. And I join that conversation. I say, hey, I struggle with that too. I'm actually not really good at it, but I got a friend who really knows the gear really well. I actually had a 15-minute conversation with them. Would you mind if I send you the link to that? Almost every time I'm like, heck yeah, I'd love to hear it. Guess what? It's an episode of my podcast. And now I just met that listener. They go listen. They typically don't stop after that, right? They're like, dang, what else you got, man? And now they're already checking out the podcast. So every day I find a topic I've covered and somebody who's looking to learn on that topic specifically, and I just invite them to it. And so that's my super growth hack. That's how I've got over 700 people listening to my podcast every week, which I know isn't a lot. I have a podcast about podcasting.
That's good.
That's the other point about listeners, and kind of my closing thought here on this side of things is not all listeners are created equal. I don't ever want 1 million people listening to my show in a week because there's not 1 million people podcasting, right? And there's like 400,000 active. So if there's more people listening than that, like I probably am reaching the wrong demographic. I'm reaching the wrong people, right? And so for me, I know that my show will never be huge. When I had my previous 2 shows, they were much bigger than this one, but one was entrepreneurship, one was faith. There's a lot more people in those categories that can listen. I'm in a small vertical, which means I'm very much so okay with just meeting one person every day who wants to be part of what we're doing here. So not all listeners are created equal. And the last kind of example I'll give is if you had a podcast with 770 listeners, could that in any possible way be better than a podcast with millions? Yes. And here's why. In this fictitious example, let's pretend like your podcast with 770 listeners is called Billionaires of the United States. And there happens to be 770 billionaires in the United States right now. Here's the thing. If I have 770 billionaires listening to my podcast, that's more valuable than tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of other people. And I'm not trying to sell a short, like
No,
not
I know what you
the
mean.
dollar. Yeah, I'm not saying like your value is based off your dollar, but if I'm trying to build a business off of it or a brand off of it, if I land one of those clients who's like, yeah, sure, $10 million, it's a joke. Here you go. Like you just built a really big business off of 770 people versus hundreds of millions, even, right? So, and that's fictitious, super extreme,
No, I get
but I,
it.
again, just want to get the right mindset. So, those are kind of my thoughts around listener growth, man.
I love it. I love it. The one thing that stuck out is the very first one about making sure you have good content, because that is so important that you have to have your content should speak for you. Also, I like about the show titles, like you said, people are searching. One of the things that I learned is, and if you notice the topic of this live stream, I said how to. When people are searching, that's the main thing they search. How to do this, how to get this, how to have this. So I put how to in front of it, because if people are looking for how to get more listens on their podcast, how to earn more money on their podcast, then hopefully they will find this replay, and then they will, or the live stream, and be a part of it. So Alex,
Yeah.
man, I want to thank you so much, my buddy. I really do. And anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, man. I always like to end with like the proper mindset of podcasting for me. First and foremost, like you've got to love it on either side of the mic. Like if you're doing it for anything other than the fact that you really just enjoy creating content that serves people, I don't know if you're going to make it long term. And I'm not trying to be rude or mean, but if it's strictly like money, business, like growth, influence, if it's all those things, those are all byproducts of the way that you show up to serve somebody else. So I encourage you, think about the person who's going to hear you and what value you add to them.
Mm.
Go back to your why and make sure your why is bigger than just being you. Your why has to come from a place of serving others and adding value to their lives. And then I always say, do for one what you wish you can do for all. If we can get the mindset that our show is for one person, right? Like knowing it's going to reach more than that. But if we can say, this is worth me doing if it really serves that one person, that really helps us keep the right perspective and mindset. So my encouragement again, yes, focus on growing the revenue, because that'll offset your production cost and make it work long term, right? Get some listeners. That way the right person ends up hearing it. Someone will share it with them, right? But the reality is, always remember, hey, you know what? I'm enjoying this. This is my way of adding value and serving that one person who needs me. And the more you can do that, the better I find you doing podcasting.
And I totally concur with you there. I always tell people, the moment it stops being fun, stop doing it, because
Yeah.
you really need to enjoy it. So Alex Sanfilippo, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Media Boss Live. Everybody, hey, make sure that you took notes, and make sure you let everyone know to watch the replay, because they can all learn something from Alex. And I'm just going to put it out there, guys. If you're a podcaster, or if you're a content creator, get with Podmatch, man. Get with Podmatch, and if you're a podcaster, get with PodScore too. So get all that going for you, man. Because Alex is the man. I'm sure he's in the lab working on something else that's going to change the podcast game right now. As long as he keeps me as his friend, I'm good. So
You're not going anywhere, bro, unless you kick
I'm
me out
not
of your
good. That's
life.
right. You're
That's
stuck with me, buddy.
it.
So thank you so much, my man. I appreciate you so much. And
Yeah.
everybody, I thank you all for listening today. And we'll see you the next time. We got another Media Boss Live coming up very, very soon. So just stick around. And Alec, we'll be talking very soon. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.